Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a young, accomplished professional from the world of food tech from Mumbai, India, Mr. Samir Seth. Samir, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Samir is the founder and chief executive officer of Hunger Incorporated, Hospitality Private Limited. So, Samir, let me start by asking you the first question. Can you share what inspired you to transition from banking to the restaurant business?
Now that I look back, it was almost over 20 years ago or so. And I think it's been one of those things where, right since I was in college, there was this moment where so I went to St. Stephen's College and we were participating in the annual college festival, I still remember. And I remember helping organize it as a fresher in the first year and really being just enamored by that adrenaline rush you get when you've just accomplished something. And I think the idea of really putting everything together in that event and making sure that people were enjoying themselves and the fellow classmates were sort of having a time of their life. I think that, coupled with the fact that I grew up in a family that was absolutely obsessed with food, we sort of spoke about each meal was spent speaking about the next meal. So I think the combination of these two sort of almost preordained probably in my head that at some point I was going to give the restaurant and the F&B world a go. Was subsequently convinced out of it. My dad hates this story because he's the sort of villain in this chapter, where he's always convincing me to do something different before I go into the world of food. But I think looking back, hindsight is 2020, and all those other experiences from doing an MBA to banking still to this date prove to be really, really helpful. So I think all in all, I think I wouldn't change a thing the way it panned out.
Incredible. And how did your time in New York City, and I've always believed New York City is the culinary capital of the world, how did your time in New York City shape your approach to hospitality and restaurant management? And what motivated you to return to India?
I think it's a combination of what took me to New York City in the first place. I think I was working after banking. I sort of transitioned to a small restaurant group in Delhi and learned a lot with them, because in the first 6 months itself helped open 3 restaurants, and then eventually went on to close 7 restaurants over 2 years. So it was a lot about what to do and what not to do as well. But at that time, as I was thinking of doing something myself, and that was always the idea of what one wanted to do in this industry, the thought remained that wasn't quite sure of what concept I would like to open, didn't really have a team. And I think I got some really good advice. And I think it's so important that I think the advice you get in these moments of confusion that end up shaping you, to go study more and explore the world more. And that's how I ended up at Cornell's hotel school. So Yash, who's my co-founder, he and I were both classmates there. And honestly, my time at Cornell, as well as my time in New York City, where I worked with Chef Daniel Boulud to begin with, and then Danny Meyer. And with Danny Meyer's group was a restaurant called North End Grill that was opening, where Chef Floyd Cardoz was my boss. I think the combination of working with these individuals and sort of being thrown into the deep end, really, like you rightly said, New York is the culinary capital of the world, and really, really changes your perspective, from service to the level at which you perform at. When the New York Times is walking in for a review, in fact, it's funny we are having this conversation today because Pete Wells, who has been the New York Times critic for the last 12 odd years, just retires today. I think today was his last, or yesterday was his last column. And it's funny because I remember having going through 3 Pete Wells visits at North End Grill. And it is absolutely once you're literally sort of thrown into the deep end, as I was saying, and you learn so much from those experiences and the team that you work with, that has completely been the foundation and the bedrock of the way I sort of approach hospitality in the world of food today.
And Samir, you just mentioned that you had an opportunity to work with Chef Daniel and Chef Danny Meyer. What were some key lessons you learned from them that you brought back to your own business?
I think I would say one, the whole idea of what does hospitality mean, right? What does it mean to not just take care of your guests, but take care of your team? How do you build culture within, and the importance of like that sort of DNA that has across an organization, right? Like we opened Hunger Inc. now back in 2015 with 35 people. We are over 400 people today. But the DNA that runs across is very much what we started with, which is like how do we take care of each other first, and in turn that'll help take care of our guests.
Mm,
And I think that would be something that I definitely drank the Kool-Aid on while I was there.
mm,
Other than that, also just I think if you think of how restaurants were even a decade ago in India, no one would change menus, no one would look at seasonal food, no one would sort of look at creating those experiences in the way they are done now. Those are the things think I picked up definitely during my time at New York, working with Danny and of course Chef Floyd. Chef Floyd was of course our co-founder as well at Hunger Inc. He unfortunately passed away during COVID,
mm,
but I think he truly was a mentor and a guide and a friend to both Yash and me and the rest of the team. And I think his legacy is something we carry on today
mm,
as well.
mhm. And you started Bombay Sweet Shop,
Mhm.
and you got Bombay Canteen. Let me start with Bombay Sweet Shop. What was the inspiration behind Bombay Sweet Shop? And how did you approach reinterpreting traditional Indian sweets?
So if I can start actually with Bombay Canteen, it'll
Okay.
help explain Bombay
Yeah.
Sweet Shop.
Yeah.
So if I had to take you back in time a little, think of
Mm,
2012. Where
mm,
did you go eat in anywhere in India? You went out for Conti food or European version of European food, or you went out to Asian restaurants.
mm,
Indian food was usually relegated either to home or
mm,
then to a version of Moti Mahal, Copper Chimney, depending on what city you were in, or an Udupi restaurant. And you knew your order before you even walked in, right?
mm,
And I think as I was working in New York, Yash was based in Singapore at that time. What we were really seeing happen was like local cuisine being reimagined. Those are the flavors we've grown up with, but like reimagined truly means that it was becoming more contextual to
mm,
current generation. It wasn't boring anymore. And nothing like that was happening with Indian food at that point.
mm,
So in 2012, when we sort of conceptualized the idea of what eventually became Bombay Canteen, this was the bedrock. Like, can Indian food be sort of made to be fun and experiential versus what it was just go in and go out.
yeah.
And and I think that started our journey in terms of like what we today, the philosophy that runs across Hunger Inc. is how do we reinterpret Indian culinary traditions at every level, right? And we've had our sort of thoughts sort of coalesce over the last decade. I think the menus we started off with Bombay Canteen in 2015 is vastly different from what we serve today, but still the original philosophy remains true. And similarly, I think our journey then took us next to O Pedro, where we applied the same thought process to Goan and Portuguese food, and took our time to sort of set that up. But while O Pedro was running, actually, we were helping Chef Floyd in New York open his restaurant there, Pawala, at that time.
Mm,
And Yash actually was traveling back and forth. And he had this sort of epiphany of sorts as he had a layover both at Paris airport and Istanbul airport at different trips, that even though he'd never been to either of these countries, he was keen to buy their food from the airport in the form of a product. So whether it's French mustard or baklava or Turkish delights. And like there was a certain amount of experience in the product itself, right? Like the way it was packaged, the way it was, the storytelling around it. And our thought process was at that point was also we were trying to figure out, is the only way to scale a restaurant company or an F&B company in India to go from 1 to 2 to 10? And the answer to us actually was emerging as no,
mm,
for two reasons. One was that a 3 to 4,000 square feet restaurants are very dependent on real estate and the demand generators around it, and there's a lack of that at scale.
mm,
And two, India just eats, different parts of India eat like a different country, so
correct.
there's no homogeneity in taste to scale.
Mm,
You have to adapt to each region, and scale is eventually a function of process, so you can't really, the sort of flexibility you need in the taste actually is counterintuitive to scale at high touch restaurants such as Bombay Canteen and O Petro. And that led us to say that can we take that philosophy of reimagining Indian culinary traditions into a product? And that kind of led to Bombay Sweet Shop. And if you look at mithai back in 2016, 2017, now you have a bunch of premium Indian mithai brands, but even back then there was nothing.
Correct.
As I'm a 90s kid, I've grown up through the 90s. The Kaju Katli to the last 25 odd years from when we were examining our sort of childhood into early adulthood had remained the same, but we'd also gone from Cadbury to Hershey's Kisses
Yeah.
to Ferrero Rocher to cupcakes to macaroons, etc. But Indian dessert had never evolved.
Correct.
And that's where we felt the gap was there, where you could truly sort of, if you could innovate, you could really create something interesting.
Mm.
Floyd would always tell us this, that till you don't take, and none of us knew how to make, none of us had experience with Indian mithais. So Floyd was the one who pushed us, saying, till you don't take time to understand tradition, you will never be able to innovate. So Chef Girish, who came on board at that point, spent almost 2 years traveling the length and breadth of India, learning from halwais, learning from mithaiwalas in different parts.
Mm.
And what we discovered was the art of making Indian sweets and mithais as beautiful as sheeting croissants or making macaroons that we all sort of watch hours of content over. And why not take that as the sort of foundation of our storytelling and bring back the magic of mithai?
Mm.
So in bringing back the magic of mithai is the genesis of Bombay Sweet Shop. And we obviously started in March 2020 in a small way, and just literally 2 weeks before the pandemic hit us in full force. And we had no option but to sort of pivot and to becoming a D2C brand at that point.
Yeah.
So in July 2020, when we reopened, we cobbled together a quick Shopify website, and off we were. And I think we've learned so much in the last 4 years, because the complexity both at the back end and at the front end of the supply chain is massive. And so it's great where we started off with one unit back in 2020. Today, we have about 16 dark stores across Bombay. We are opening our third sort of high street retail location and slowly building the scale playbook around Sweet Shop, and something which we are really, really excited to be doing.
Amazing. And any background to using the name Bombay Suite, or do you think this will lend itself to move anywhere in the country?
I think what we always say is Bombay is an emotion. And I think it will eventually, what we try to do across everything that we've created, whether it's Bombay Canteen, O Pedro, even now Veronica's, Papa's, and Thu Cutlet, which is our online magazine, is what is the emotion we want people to carry away. And I think Bombay represents, it's not just a city, it's like New York, like it evokes something in you.
Correct.
And I think for that reason, I feel the idea of the word Bombay can travel to many, many places.
Well said. So, and also for my viewers and listeners, can you give me one or two examples of how you have crafted or curated some of the Indian sweets into something different?
Absolutely. So one of my favorites is what we call the indie bar. So you might have had patisa before.
Yeah.
But imagine now a Twix bar or a Bounty, where the bottom is usually a biscuit, but the bottom now has been of the sort of bar has been turned into a patisa layer. On top of that is coconut and caramel. So it's a Twix meets Bounty meets Indian mithai, very much in terms of its inspiration. Similarly, I think even when we look at rasgulla, we create a tiramisu, but with soaking rasgullas in espresso and then creating the rest of the dish with it. So it's something which is extremely popular. So again, gives you the spectrum of where we do something like super fresh, which is ready to eat that day, versus something that can be sort of put on a shelf. So it's the whole gamut.
Thank you. I'm going to experiment and order some of the...
No, I was going to say, please send me your address after this. Would love to send you some.
Okay, I will do that. My next question, Samir, is that you handle multiple brands. And I have always seen that the restaurant business or the food business is very difficult. How do you ensure consistency and excellence across so many different brands?
I think the fact that we have multiple brands is a function of what I was describing earlier. Each brand has its own reason for existing at that point. But I think, again, at the back of it, I think we always say you're as good as the last meal or last drink you serve someone. That core philosophy around consistency is very, very important. I think when people look outside in into the food business, they're like, oh, it must be amazing tasting dishes all the time. It must be amazing creating all the time. But honestly, that's 10% of like creating is 10% of the job. 90% is focusing on consistency through training, through process, through repetition more than anything else. Like at the end of the day, you want to come back because you're assured of a great experience.
Yeah.
And I think we've definitely built a great sort of muscle and team around that thought process in terms of how do we train our teams and how do we encourage them to be confident about what they're doing? How do you encourage them to sort of make sure that they're, if there is a mistake happening, how do you communicate about that? Like if you look at culturally things in India and running teams in India, especially in the hospitality space, there are two things that I feel have always plagued it. One is that service equals to servitude. And unfortunately, that's something which is just culturally there. Um, as much as I love my grandmother, her first reaction to me switching from banking was the bank chhod ke parathe bechne ja rahe ho." Like it just has that sort of notion to it. And I think it's changing now. I think today's chefs and restaurants are held in a different light. And the second is actually something which I feel I personally suffered from, like coming up in the schooling system in India. Fear is your motivator usually, right? Like, but the fear actually is counterintuitive to doing great things because you then tend to hide things from for the fear of repercussion. So how do you sort of create an environment which is open to communication, where people are talking about the things that are going wrong and holding a mirror up to each other versus just saying that, just brushing things under the carpet and hoping for a better day? And I think those are the two things that, which if I had to pinpoint, is something we worked very hard on and be able to create the culture like we were talking about earlier at Hunger Inc.
Amazing. The other question that I wanted to ask you, Sameer, was that uh, when it comes to Indian food, people are fairly traditional about what they want. And I was talking to somebody else, and they said the largest order is kali dal, chicken tikka, and roti, for example. And that's
Or
probably
biryani on the aggregators.
or biryani on the aggregator. How do you balance innovation and tradition when it comes to Indian food?
So I think it's a great question. I think, and I think it actually speaks to why the opportunity of what we are doing is so large, whether with Bombay Sweet Shop or with the rest of the brands as well. I think the way we've learned to do it is a little bit of a framework which we call form versus flavor, right? Like I think for us, if you think of dal, for example, like you said, kali dal, what you are associating is the form of the dal and the flavor of the dal, which is what causes the emotional connect, which is called what causes the craving. I still remember in 2020, Chef Hussain, who he heads all the kitchens at the restaurant, he was like, what if I spun it on the head and made a safed dal, but when you took a bite of it, it reminds you of kali dal, right? So all the sort of lentils being used are whitish in color, which gives you the idea that you're eating something very creamy, but it's not creamy at all. It's actually just dal. Like today in restaurants, kali dal also originally the creaminess came from sort of the cooking process, and that's why it was on the arch for so long. But today now cream is added as a sort of quick hack to it. But what the larger point I'm making is, when we take innovation and we innovate on both the form and the flavor, you come up with something new, which is sort of, you don't emotionally connect with it. But if I take just one of those aspects and play with it, to give you an example, another product that we created for Bombay Sweet Shop, which is extremely popular, is what we call the Bombay Bhel Chikki. So it's Bhel Puri, but in the form of a chikki.
Correct.
But when you bite into it, it feels to you that you're eating Bhel Puri. Like, and that's how you, in my opinion, are able to innovate, where you're able to sort of play with one of the factors, whether the flavor or the form. We've just sort of come up with new versions of bhujia. It looks like a bhujia, but like the idea is that it's got chili cheese in it. Because if you look at, again, what sells the most as comfort food is a chili cheese toast. But now in the form of a bhujia, it's still as addictive and sort of wanting crave-worthy as it would in the form of a chili cheese toast. So that's how we keep playing around with it, and it's iterative at the end of the day.
Amazing, amazing. I have time for 2 or 3 more questions, Samir. My next question is, what, in your view, are some of the key elements to create a memorable dining experience in one of your restaurants?
To me, it always boils down to how do you create a memorable experience is really understanding people's behavior.
Correct.
Like at any given point, if you, for whatever you're creating, I think the underlying basis needs to be behavior. To give you a
Mm.
small example, if you're coming in for a working lunch
Yeah.
and you're there for a meeting, and if I start spieling you the sort of where each ingredient has come from and etc., you will actually not think you're there for an experience. You'll end up getting annoyed
Mm.
because you've not understood the behavior of like someone was sitting down for a meeting, having being on a clock, having to get back to office. You can still create an amazing experience where actually, if I look at that behavior and give you a really interesting version of a, we would do these in at O Pedro, for example, Goan thalis, but do it in a really fun way, but which is a quick meal for you at the end of the day, and it's a
Mm.
no fuss way of interacting with your server. It actually turns into an experience. It can be very basic, but it turns into an experience. So I
Mm.
think the key is understanding behavior, and two is also then constantly be listening to feedback.
Mm.
uh, to us, like we won't be everything for everyone, but if something is getting repeated again and again, then clearly something needs to be tweaked. So having that flexibility to tweak something
Mm.
is very important. And I think the third pillar is the storytelling around it. Now,
Mm.
there are different ways of doing the storytelling at different times. So you figure out if for a Bombay Sweet Shop product, it's in the packaging and the way we sort of write about the product versus in a restaurant.
Mm.
It's where, so we just opened Papa's a few months ago, where it's truly an immersive theatrical experience almost with the team versus a Bombay Canteen or Veronica's, where it's an interaction with the server. So I think the context matters a lot in terms of how you do the storytelling at that point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Two more questions. What led to the creation of enthukutlet.com, and what kind of stories do you share there?
So I think the segue from storytelling is exactly what the inspiration was. I think during the pandemic, we realized social media had become the be all and end all of being able to interact with our guests, right? Like if we had to get people to do something online, that's where we sort of did our storytelling. And we were like, there are actually so many stories that we have sort of encountered over the last decade now of running Hungary, which showcases the beauty and diversity of the food of India. Like,
Right.
we're like, why be just constricted to the four walls of the restaurant? Because
Mm.
in the pandemic, it showed that there is a way to tell those stories and sort of
Right.
spread them far and wide.
Mm.
That became the origin of wanting to do that. And I think Entu Cutlet now, over a period of time, tells unusual stories of food in India, where we're
Okay.
constantly trying to find what is hidden. Like I think we've in even though it's been a decade of working in this space, I think we're only scratching the surface. Even I get my mind gets boggled by things that you come across every day. Uh,
Mm.
and I think there's such beauty and diversity to food in India,
Yeah.
where there's been so much like it's very much like what you were talking about your podcast series, right? Like creating the largest repertoire of knowledge.
Mm.
It is Entu Cutlet was born out of the idea that can we document the knowledge around and the stories behind Indian food
Mm.
in an interesting way, which either educates or entertains people, and
Amazing.
then truly and it's a truly a fun sort of way of doing it at the end of the day.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. And my last question to you, Samir, given the amount of passion I see coming through in the for the food business and the hospitality industry, what is your perspective on the current trends in hospitality that excite you the most? And what do you see as the future of the restaurant business in India?
I think actually what excites me the most about India right now is I think it boils down to people. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is what's happening as we are seeing the shift over the last 10, 15 years in terms of that movement from service equals servitude. So
Yeah.
I always say food is the new music. Like
Hmm.
people now want to be in this industry.
Hmm.
So what's happening is the kids are studying here, moving abroad, learning, picking up their craft, honing their craft across the world, and actually recognizing that India is an amazing place to now wield that craft.
Hmm.
Just the way I think Yash and I and Chef Floyd took that chance about over a decade ago. We're finding more and more people come back. And I think as talent moves back, you will see more and more interesting things happen where people are experimenting all the way from like just to take the example of cheese, like there's some amazing cheese coming out of India now because people are wanting to make it, right? Like, and it's something as simple as that. You wouldn't have imagined 20, 25 years ago where life revolved around Amul, that we would be
Which was
getting,
also in short supply.
which was also in short supply, that we would now have amazing
I know.
brie to Gouda to what,
Yeah.
call it whatever you want to call it. Like it's all
Mhm.
being made here now. You just have to look for it.
Absolutely.
So I think that to me is the most exciting part, where I think Indian food will no longer just be restricted to. I always say this, just because we grew up with chola bhatura doesn't mean that this generation doesn't love his hummus as much.
Mm.
We have just our own versions of it.
Yeah.
So the story of that hummus is as important as the story of that chola bhatura. It's the same
Correct.
ingredient.
Correct.
So to us, it really, I think that's the exciting part of how people will sort of apply their knowledge, their craft to what, and create new traditions in India more than anything else.
Amazing. And on that note, and what you're saying, that there are exciting times indeed for food, people who love food, coming up with people like you, crafting such amazing experiences. Thank you, Samir, for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about Bombay Canteen, Bombay Sweet Shop, about your experiences with your chefs. We've covered a lot of ground on different aspects of food, about hospitality. I think I picked up some very interesting thoughts, cues from you on this business. But thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.